Good morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Detective Pikachu Returns for the Nintendo Switch. I really loved the original Detective Pikachu on 3DS, despite me usually hating Pokemon games, but that's because 1, the spin-offs tend to interest me way more than the mainline games, and 3, I really love detective games. If you've been paying attention to the reviews that I've done this year, I've already reviewed Master Detective Archives and Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, so why not have a third detective game reviewed in 2023? The original Detective Pikachu was kind of more of a sleeper hit on the 3DS for a variety of reasons. I think the two biggest factors were the fact that it was a 3DS game in 2018 and the Switch had already been on the market for a year, and the fact that the movie came out just a year after and it was much more well advertised, I guess, for lack of a better word. And also probably because Ryan Reynolds voiced Detective Pikachu and he has more, I guess, star power than Kaiji Tang. To me, Kaiji Tang's Bolt of Brilliance was the OG Pikachu, and I vastly prefer it, but that's up to taste. Detective Pikachu Returns more or less continues the story of the game, and doesn't really provide a whole lot of quality improvement or touch-ups to the original game's formula besides putting it on the big screen, but that's totally okay because my original review was absolutely terrible. I rewatched it before going into this, and it's grainy, it has no footage. Granted, I couldn't really do much about that because I didn't have a 3DS capture card. So I'll treat this as kind of a re-review because they're pretty much the same game, all things considered, just that this one is technically a sequel. The premise of the game is that you control both Tim Goodman and his partner Detective Pikachu. What separates Detective Pikachu from the average Pikachu is that this one can talk, he has a gruff, middle-aged man type of voice, and he really loves coffee. In the first game he liked to flirt with women, but I think they figured that that was a bit creepy, that there were interspecies relationships, so they got rid of that for the sequel, thankfully. Now he's just a coffee addict and someone who can talk. Tim is the only human who can understand what Pikachu is saying, and so they have kind of a working relationship where when they're working on a case, Pikachu will talk to the Pokemon and interpret them for Tim, and Tim will talk to the humans, and then he and Pikachu will work together to figure out how to solve the case. Unlike the first Detective Pikachu, this story revolves more around individual mysteries surrounding a bigger story as opposed to a whole bunch of whodunits. Granted, they still have those, but you get one chapter in particular that doesn't even have a whodunit. It's just how are we going to get out of this precarious situation and what are the clues that we need to escape. So I like the fact that this entry focuses a lot more on just the sheer mystery element of it, as opposed to just trying to be an Ace Attorney clone. You play in third-person perspective where you walk around very, very small environments, and you'll click on areas of interest to observe them. Sometimes the camera will zoom in to give you more of a first-person perspective, and then you'll click on things like you did in the Ace Attorney investigation series to gather more information. You'll also talk to people and then get their testimonies, and every time you find an object of interest, it gets added to your case notebook. And then once you've got enough clues, usually either Tim or Pikachu will say it's time to start deducing, so you'll always know when you have enough clues to actually solve the next mystery, because when you go into the case notebook, the begin deducing button will be yellow when it's usually blue if you haven't gathered enough information. You can technically deduce whenever you want, but I never tested that because I was like, the game is being so convenient in letting me know when it's the right time that I might as well just go along with what the game says. So then you have a chance to look through the clues that you've gathered, and then when you deduce, you'll have a couple of options of what the answer could be. When you hover over the options, the game will give an explanation of, okay, now that you've selected this option, this is what it means in the grand scheme of things. And usually the wording is done in such a way that all of the options could be plausible, but you have to use process of elimination to determine why that isn't the ultimate answer. Granted, this is a very, very easy game. Probably intended for children more than anything because I very rarely got the wrong answer on anything. It could just be because I play a lot of detective games, but I think it's also by design that it's very simple. And even if I got something wrong, it was usually because I was confused by the wording of things. And even then, I would always get the answer right on the second try, just further reinforcing that it's a stupidly easy game. But just because it's easy doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I just think that fans of more strategic detective games might find this very much a breeze. The game is also very handholdy, with it being very clear about when you've investigated everything in an area, where you need to go next. And just overall, the game wants you to be able to solve the mystery as quickly as possible. And even if all of the prompts don't make sense to you, you can press left on the control pad and either Pikachu or Tim will give you even more of a specific hint of where you need to go. Traveling around the environments is also pretty simple, as you can toggle a fast run option, which the game doesn't properly animate, but I don't really care in this case because I like to be able to move fast in video games. I always appreciate it when games have a run button or when the characters can do stuff like ride horses to make them go quicker. So this was a very nice feature, even if I found it weird that in the options menu you have the option to turn it off. Like, who wouldn't want to move faster? Thankfully, the environments are usually pretty small and it's very hard to get lost, so you hardly ever feel like you're meandering around. And even if you are, it's usually pretty easy to get back on track to what you need to do. One thing that this game tries to add to, I guess, give completionists something to work toward is that there are side quests that you can do. Sometimes you'll find a character or a Pokemon that has a request, and usually these requests are stupidly easy. You just have to look for yet another object or person with an exclamation mark that's blue, and then you click on that, side quest solved. I didn't feel motivated to solve these side quests because they don't really do anything when you beat them. I guess it's more so of just the satisfaction of helping people. Technically, there's a reward. When you go back to Tim's apartment between cases, there's a newspaper on the table, and you can check the newspaper to see, like, oh, hey, this person is happy because of your efforts. But I feel like that's kind of a lame reward. Maybe there's some kind of grand story reveal if you get all of them, but I just didn't feel motivated to do them. So whenever I saw a character that had a blue exclamation mark above them, I usually just ignored them, unless I was impulsive and was just like, oh hey, there's a new character to talk to. Oh wait, I didn't check to see if it was white instead. Detective Pikachu Returns probably realized that the constant detective work of the original game and its contemporaries like Ace Attorney was a bit too boring for players. So this entry tries to spice things up by having a couple more gameplay elements. Sometimes you'll enlist the help of other Pokemon, such as Growlithe, who can use her sniff ability to track down scents, or another Pokemon that can punch things. Sometimes there are stealth sections, and the game does a good job of varying up the gameplay. Granted, these sections are also very easy, and you probably won't fail, like, at all, and even if you do, the game is pretty lenient with not letting you backtrack too much. Ironically, now that I mentioned backtracking, that reminds me of another interesting design choice the game made, where there are times where the game does make you go backward and forward from one spot of the map to another, but then other times it like randomly changes its mind and says like, hey, do you want to go back to that previous area? Why is that not a consistent thing? Or at the very least, maybe only have you backtrack once, and then from then on the game says, hey, let's do this. Chapter 4 being perhaps the worst example, where you really do have to go from one area to the next with a loading screen in between. Now this game is not a very pleasant game to look at, as it feels like everything was the bare minimum of textures and animations. Usually the characters don't gesture a whole lot, there's typically not a whole lot of facial expressions. Textures are very bland, and it looks like this probably was originally intended to be a 3DS game, but then development shifted over to the Switch because it came out too late in the 3DS's lifespan, and thus that's why it took so darn long for this to come out. But I think the end product was still worth it because it's nowhere near as broken or abysmal in the graphics and performance department as, say, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And they actually have voice acting, which that puts the main Pokemon games to shame. But I think what really sells this game is the satisfaction of solving the cases. Like getting the answer right feels rewarding, even if it's pretty easy. And I also think that the story payoff is done really well. The game keeps you in suspense about all of its various mysteries, and while I knew the answer to the big twist from the beginning, it was still nice to see how the game explored it and how the characters came to that realization. I also think the ending was nice and touching, even if I think it was over way too quickly. And I do plan on talking about the Catholic elements of that twist if this game ends up making it onto my best games of 2023 list. Overall, I think Detective Pikachu Returns isn't a very pretty game. It's very, very easy, and the characters are very forgettable, except for Pikachu himself. He's a hoot, and Kaiji Tang does a great job of voicing him. But it's fun to solve the individual mysteries. It's great that the game doesn't have a penalty system or any real way of having a game over. The game has a very pro-life message to it, with the Pokemon always trying to be protected in some degree, with even if they're hurt, it's usually not a fatal blow. Overall, the game puts a lot of emphasis on family values and justice, which is nice. And I do think it was worth the wait for the incredible story payoff. Now, you might be asking, is it worth playing this game if you've already seen the Detective Pikachu movie? Because the original Detective Pikachu ended on a cliffhanger, and the movie seemed to resolve all of the answers. I would say that the two experiences have a very, very different feel to them. Like, sure, they start out with the premise of Tim trying to find his dad and Pikachu trying to recover his memories, but the journey they take to get towards the end is extremely different. So I still think you'll like Detective Pikachu Returns even if you've seen the movie. I think you might be a little bit disappointed that some of the mysteries you've probably solved way before the characters do, and there are definitely moments where you will know more information than the players and will be impatiently saying, okay, hurry up and come to the conclusion that I figured out eons ago. But I still think it's a fun time if you're willing to realize that this is aimed much more towards younger players, and it won't be nearly as taxing on your brain as Ace Attorney. But if you have a little kid who's aspiring to be a detective and wants to get into those mature games, this will be a great starting point. If you're wondering if you should pick this up first if you haven't played the original Detective Pikachu, the game does a pretty good job of recapping the events of the previous game. There's sort of like a previously on section at the beginning where Pikachu narrates the important stuff about the first game, and the game will always bring up like, oh hey, remember this from the previous game if it's important. I think one area where this stumbles a bit is that Tim's friend Amelia hardly ever appears, which she was such a big presence in the first game. But apart from that, I think that this was pretty well done. Very simplistic, but overall a very charming game. Now, it does go for $50, which I think is a bit steep for a game that has such pathetic graphics and, in my opinion, is over way too quickly. It took me a little over 9 hours to beat it, which is pretty short for a Pokemon game. So I think you should either rent it or let it go on sale because it's a good game, but not that good of a game. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section if I missed anything, what you thought of the review, if you're going to be picking up. I love reading and responding to the comments, so please don't be shy in sharing your thoughts. Special thanks to my patrons, Matthew Rakowski, Spoon Ghost, and Splat Cat for supporting me financially. it should be almost over, but thankfully they're helping me carry on until the resolution. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!